We're making the turn today from our give portion of Be Rich to the serve portion. And while all of you are considering what you're going to do locally, and while we're considering what we're going to do locally, really all over our city and all over the state and all over the country, as dozens and dozens and dozens of churches have joined the Be Rich campaign year after year after year, I want to spend just a few minutes shifting from local to global and talk about what you have been doing over the past really 16 or 17 years all over the world, and to give you a picture of what you could do if you decide to serve not just locally, but globally. But to help with that conversation, I want to introduce you to the gentleman who for 16 years has created the strategy and has driven all of our global initiatives. He's kind of the man behind the curtain that has enabled us to make a big difference all over the world. So would you please welcome to the stage, DURWOOD SNEAD. DURWOOD? You got a woo out there. Yeah, I think it might have been your family is here today. Yeah, so again, if you've ever been on a Global X trip, if you've ever given money to a student or somebody who went on one of our Global X trips, this is the guy that has driven that for years, and he's sort of a best-kept secret. So I thought I would bring you out from behind the curtain and let people actually meet you, DURWOOD. But as I mentioned, you've been serving with us and serving our churches for 16 years. Would you spend just a couple of minutes telling us a little bit about what you did before that?
Sure.
And how you got into this position?
Absolutely. So I was in business for 26 years before, helped to build several different companies, loved doing that, had a great wife, 5 wonderful children, kind of living life, but somehow I felt like that there was more. I felt like God had something else for me, and I wanted more, but I wasn't sure exactly what it was. And then I went on my first mission trip when I was 39 years old, and everything changed. So I went with my son, my oldest son, who was 12 years old at the time, and we went to a country called Yugoslavia in Eastern Europe.
That doesn't even exist
anymore. Doesn't even exist
Yeah,
anymore,
yeah.
right. We were serving this seminary that was there in a little town called Osijek in Yugoslavia. And there were these pastors there from all these countries all over Eastern Europe. And we began listening to these pastors and their stories. So there was one pastor, I remember, from Bulgaria, and he was telling us about how he came to be a follower of Jesus in Bulgaria. And then he started telling us about what God was doing there in Bulgaria. And there was a guy from Romania, and he was telling us about Romania, and he said, just literally a few months ago was the first time that we could actually openly celebrate church. In fact, he said in Christmas last year was the first time we actually could have bells in the steeples of churches on Christmas Day, because we had been under this repressive dictatorship for all these different years. And then there were people from other places in Yugoslavia and even some from Hungary, and they were all telling us these stories. And I remember thinking that night that I hadn't heard any of these stories before, and that there must be tens of thousands of these stories going on all over the world, and I'd never heard any of them, and my view of God just exploded. I said, I've been following you for a long time, and yet I had no idea that you were doing all this stuff and that you were this big. And then the last day that we were there, we met this lady who was from the province of Kosovo. I had never heard of Kosovo before. And she was a very accomplished lady, very smart, spoke great English. She was ethnic Albanian, but she'd just gotten fired from her job at the local TV station in Pristina, Albania. The president of Yugoslavia was trying to get rid of all of ethnic Albanians in the media because he didn't want them to have any influence in the country. They were a minority. And so she came up to the seminary to ask the president there just to pray for her. And so we were just taken by her and her story. So we prayed for her. And then we come home after the trip, and about 2 days after I got home, a friend of mine with a ministry called Campus Crusade for Christ called. And he was with this ministry called the Jesus Film Project that brought the Jesus film about Jesus all over the world. And he said, hey, by the way, if you could just be praying for something for us, we're getting ready to bring the Jesus film to Albania. And if you could just be praying, we're looking for somebody to help us do that. And I said, so what are you looking for? He said, well, we need somebody who's ethnic Albanian, we need somebody who speaks great English, but we also need someone who has media experience. And I said, Ronnie, I think I just met her. And he says, what? And I told him about this lady, and sure enough, this lady ends up moving to Albania and becomes a key director with the Jesus film there in that country. Now, I realized that God did not need me to do that, but he allowed me to be part of what he was doing, and it was so exciting. I said, I want more of this. So that's 6 months after that, the Balkan War started, The very city that we were in, we were watching on CNN being bombed. There were refugees being created everywhere. There was genocide going on all over the country, just a terrible, terrible war. So we began going back over on short-term trips to serve in refugee camps, mainly refugee camps in Croatia serving Bosnian refugees. And then we began working with some of these refugees as they got resettled to the U.S. and to Atlanta to help them find jobs, help them find places to live.
But meanwhile, you're still in the business world. This is your side hustle. Yeah.
Right, yeah,
Going
exactly.
to refugee camps, yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So I continued in the business world for 11 more years. But it's like my world had changed. It was almost like a new world had opened up that I didn't even know existed before. And I started looking at everything differently. Started looking at people differently. If I had a taxi driver that had an accent, I would just ask them, so where's that beautiful accent from? And then they would start talking to me about it. And I'd say, well, tell me a little bit about your story. And even in our business, we started thinking through how can we be more intentional about creating environments where people can actually live out the values that we feel like are important and take care of their family and even have the opportunity to serve in places like this, really around the world. So, it's very cool, too, to think about how when we began coming to North Point in 1998, we came the first Sunday that North Point actually met in the building in Alpharetta. We didn't even know that was the first Sunday. We just came that Sunday and said, whoa, this is the first Sunday, that's cool. So I volunteered in missions and men's ministry, which are my two passions, and met Paul Stuber, who was a volunteer running missions at the time, and Lane Jones on staff, and you, Andy. And then just got this amazing opportunity to join staff and be part of what's one of the greatest blessings of my life. Wow. So thank you.
There's about 11 years between that first mission trip and your transition out of the business world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, one of the things that we have in common, and perhaps that DURWOOD and I have in common with many of you, is we grew up going to church, and missions was kind of like they were missionaries somewhere in the world, and once a year they come to the church and they show some slides. You remember the slides, Hopefully you don't remember. We didn't have these back then. Yeah, slides. And they were curious people and interesting people and not people we necessarily wanted to be like, but we knew that we liked them, and then they would go away, we'd forget about them for a year. So when we embraced our global responsibility as a church, we did it very differently for a lot of reasons. Would you talk a little bit about our strategy?
Sure, absolutely. So I had the very similar experience to what you had in the church that I grew up in. And it was a church that cared about the world. In fact, we had missionaries all over the world, but we had a map in the back of the church, I remember, it had lights all over it that represented the places where all of our missionaries served around the world. But I remember it just seemed so distant, and I felt so disconnected with everything we were doing in the world. I looked at that map and said, well, it's cool those people are doing that. So we have a very different approach here. We have a very hands-on approach that works through amazing partners that are doing extraordinary work in some of the most difficult places on earth.
And by partners, you mean organizations that are on the ground.
Yeah, partner organizations, absolutely. We vet these people for about 2 years, going through a whole process of, we want organizations that obviously are doing a great job at what they do, their leadership, but also organizations that are making a huge difference and really looking at root causes and really trying to change all those things. So some of our partners work with refugees, like in Palestine and in Lebanon. We have other partners that work with orphans, work with widows, but always with the poor and with people that are at-risk families and children. So a couple of examples. 410 Bridge is our partner that works in Africa and also works in Haiti. And 410 Bridge does an amazing job of going into a village, a very poor village, pulling together leaders from that village, pastors and other leaders that are there, they're responsible people, and having them form a community council so they can determine the priorities for that village. And then 410 Bridge, and through the generosity of you and giving to Be Rich, we come alongside this village and these people and help them to accomplish their own priorities in their village.
But they do it.
They do it themselves, exactly. We just simply come alongside to help. Then we have a partner called Heart for Africa. Heart for Africa works in Swaziland. And Swaziland is not a very large country, only 1 million people. And yet Swaziland has the highest age rate of any country in the world. It is becoming a country of children because all the parents are dying. In fact, when we look at the population, basically you have a very small group of people at the top that are older, and then as they get younger, the population gets larger and larger. So there are all these children that don't have any parents. In fact, many of these children are actually even born with AIDS. And our partner there has actually discovered through help with other organizations that there's a pill that you can give a child who's born with AIDS that will actually cure AIDS if it's given to them very soon after they're born. But our partner there takes these children in, has these children's homes to take care of these kids, nurture them and develop them, and really just simply show them the love of Jesus in a very nurturing place. But all of our partners have a ministry that's very, very personal to them. And each of their ministries started with a story. So if we could put up this next slide, I just want to talk to you a little bit about one of the stories. So Gary Powell, he's here with the man with the yellow hard hat. Gary was a very successful business guy running one of the largest and most luxurious hotels in El Salvador. Great hotel. Gary built the business there. He not only ran the hotel well, but he actually created new businesses for them. He created a ballroom that became a great wedding venue in El Salvador. In addition to that, he actually even created some environments within the hotel where very important people throughout the whole country would come to meet. It was just a great place to meet. So Gary's got this great job, great success, and then suddenly one day, someone comes to him and tells him about these children that they found in an abandoned building just outside the city. So Gary and his wife Sharon go over there and they see these kids in these squalid conditions, kids that are emaciated. There's the smells in the building are just awful. And they're looking at the kids that are tattered, living by themselves. And Gary and his wife went out, bought some food, bought some water, some provisions for them, brought them over there. And he just couldn't get these kids out of his mind. And so you know what he did? He actually quit his great cushy job running this big luxurious hotel and started La Casa de mi Padre, our father's house, to take care of children that come out of this situation. And so he created these children's homes run by house parents that actually are loving Christian parents that are caring for these kids. And many of these children now have actually grown up, graduated from high school, gotten great jobs, and some have even gone on to graduate from college. Just amazing story of redemption.
I call people like Gary the gonna do it anyway people. You know, they have a vision. God gets a hold of their heart. They're gonna do it anyway. We might as well help them.
Absolutely.
And when you marry resources and people resources with the gonna do it anyway people, extraordinary things happen. And that's so often the case with all of our Intersect partners.
It's amazing. So what we do is we actually come alongside these partners to help in three ways. The first way is through your generosity and giving to be rich that we just launched last week, we help them financially. We just help to fuel and accelerate what they're doing financially. Then we come alongside them and help with consulting, almost like a venture capitalist would with a company, where you want to help that company get connected to people that can really help them grow, get on a solid foundation. And then the third way we come around them is through manpower. We send people on short-term trips to go and serve these partners. In fact, over the last 6 years, 5,000 of you, many of you here in the audience, and people at our other churches, 5,000 have gone to actually serve on short-term trips. Many people have gone to serve on multiple trips. We have a physician, big physician, very important practice from this church that goes on 3 trips a year. You know, takes time away from his practice just to go and serve another place in the world. So thank you, because of your generosity, a lot of our partners are thriving.
So last month, we opened up registration for trips for 2019. So I want to get back to this conversation, but real quick, tell us a little bit about what we're doing in 2019 and maybe what the opportunities are.
Absolutely. So for 2019, we actually have 92 trip opportunities that will be going to 16 countries, serving 12 partners, and we need 1,800 people, volunteers, to go and serve on these trips. Now, I'm not stuttering or giving you the wrong number. It's not 180, it's 1,800 opportunities for volunteers. And the question I'm sure you all have is, well, wait a minute, why should we send people to another country? Why should we send all these people? Why don't we just send them some money? Well, see, the problem is that we work in places all over the world where there's lots and lots of poverty, and we think of poverty as economic. People don't have enough resources, and that's true. But economic poverty causes another kind of poverty. It causes poverty of spirit. And poverty of spirit means that a person has lost their dignity, they've lost hope, and they've lost pretty much all options. They think of themselves as almost nothing because nobody cares about them. So the greatest gift that we can actually give someone who has poverty of spirit or has lost dignity is giving them the gift of dignity by simply going there, sitting down with them, and asking them to tell us their story. You would not believe the honor that people feel when they know that you have come on a long flight, you've taken time off from work, you've sacrificed to just simply come and listen to them and their story. And this really was brought home to me about 2 years ago, and I was visiting Lebanon. Lebanon is an interesting country that is right next door to the country of Syria. And there's been a war going on that most of you have heard of in Syria for several years. Syria has about 26 million people. Half of them have been displaced, meaning they can't live in the same place where they lived before. But about 6 million of them have been displaced outside of Syria. They're refugees in other countries. They can't live in their own country anymore, and they have almost nothing. 2 million of these refugees have come to Lebanon. And if we put up this next slide, and most of the people there are living in these tent towns that are little shanty tents that are actually on some land that a farmer will lease to them. So a family, when they put a tent up there, it's not free. They've got to even pay for that tent. And then a number of people are really coming around them. Well, we have a partner called Heart for Lebanon that actually works with these Syrian refugees and does amazing things to them and through them. But one day, I was there, and I was sitting in one of these tents with a family similar to this next slide here, similar to the group that's here, and we were sitting in this tent, and this lady was there, and I said, "Do you mind just telling me your story?" And she began this heartbreaking story that is almost difficult for me to repeat. So she told me, she said, my family, husband, several kids were living in our home in Syria. Husband had a great job, and we were just living life, and the war started. And our house got destroyed, so we had to move. And then my husband had to go to war, and my husband was killed. And then my teenage son was killed. And she said, then my 3-year-old daughter was hit by shrapnel from a bomb, and I held my 3-year-old daughter in my hands and watched her die in my hands. He said, I buried my daughter, grabbed the hands of my 2 other children, and we just started walking towards Lebanon. And now we got here, and we're here in this refugee camp. No one wants us. We're not sure why we're here. We don't know what we're going to do for the future. And as I'm in their tent weeping, she's telling me this story. Then she looks at me and she said, do you have children? And I said, well, yeah, I've got 5 children. She said, do you have grandchildren? Yeah, I've got 13 grandchildren. And she said, God bless your children and your grandchildren because you listened to my story. I'm thinking, are you kidding? You're playing a blessing over my family just because I listened to your story? But no one listened to her. And she had the opportunity just to share, and it was amazing what that did for her. So the greatest gift we can give to people is simply the dignity of simply listening to their story. But the greatest gift we can give ourselves is going and learning and allowing God to speak to us through serving other people in other places where they are encountering things that we probably will never have to encounter in our lives. Do you know that half the people on the face of the earth live on $2.50 a day or less? So one of our friends, your friend and mine, Tom Rhodes, Tom's an architect. He's designed several of our churches. And Tom was serving in Asia and serving with our partner over there that works with special needs orphans. And one day, this little boy, special needs boy, who was an orphan, who had had a tough time with his tummy, and he had made a mess in the bathroom. And so Tom was on his hands and knees in the bathroom, simply cleaning up the mess on the floor. And he said, suddenly I felt someone was behind me. And so he said, I looked back, there's no one there. So he said, I kept cleaning, and then I felt it again. I just felt someone was behind me, and suddenly these chills started going up and down my spine. I looked back, and he said, I still didn't see anybody, but he said, Durwood, I just sensed it was Jesus. He was right there behind me. And he said, what am I supposed to do with that? I said, Tom, I don't know. You've had an encounter with Jesus, and something's going to change in your life. And that changed Tom's life. Because God speaks to us in these moments when we least expect it, when we're simply doing what he tells us to do and serving the poor.
And I know Tom, and as odd as that story may be to some people, Tom is the last person on this planet that would make something up like that. He's
Absolutely.
such an extraordinarily normal
Right.
guy.
Yeah.
So kind of on these same lines, Some years ago, actually a lot of years ago, under your leadership, we shifted our focus to specifically serve at-risk women and children. And we do things beyond that, but that's kind of the core, as you just illustrated. I think it would be helpful to explain to our churches why you and your team made that shift. And it goes, it comes directly from something Jesus said.
Absolutely. So yeah, we just looked at the way Jesus ministered and the way Jesus instructed us to act and what we should do. So one of the things we noticed as my team just kind of got together and kind of studied this was we noticed that Jesus spent almost all of his time with poor people. People that were sick, people that had demons, just all these people that were outcast. And that's where he loved to spend his time. In fact, usually when he was around religious people, he had some pretty harsh words, everything for them. But the other thing that we noticed was that Jesus was evasive. Frequently, when he was speaking to a lot of people, especially religious leaders, he would tell parables. He'd tell a story, and people wondered, so what does that mean? And later he would tell his disciples and his close followers exactly what that meant. But there was one subject where he wasn't evasive at all. He just spoke to it directly. And it was about meeting the needs of the poor and needy really among you. And he was very clear. So in Matthew chapter 25, Jesus was explaining a future event. And he said, okay, I'm going to come back. I'm going to be leaving here, dying, resurrected, but then I'm coming back. And he says, when I come back, I'm going to be on my throne. And I'm going to be sitting up here, and all the nations are going to be arrayed in front of me. And he said, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide them. I'm going to take the righteous and kind of move them over here, and then I'm going to take these people and move them over here. And he said, I'm going to do all that because, he said, you guys are ready to inherit the kingdom that I've got prepared for you from the foundation of the earth because, he says, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. And then Jesus said, what you're going to tell me is, hey, we didn't do that to you. We never visited you in prison. We never gave you water. And Jesus said, inasmuch as you've done it for the least of these people among me, you've done it to me. So Jesus was very clear. And then Jesus' brother, James, wrote in the book of James when he was writing to the 12 tribes that were dispersed throughout all the nations. He wrote to them and he said, okay, here's the central theme. Look, guys, faith without works is dead. Faith means nothing if you don't have works to back it up. And he says, by the way, pure and undefiled religion is meeting the needs of widows and orphans in their need. So we felt, like you've told us many times, Andy, if a guy predicts his own death and resurrection and pulls it off,
do whatever that guy says.
We kind of need to listen to him. And then if his brother believes in him, we probably should listen to his instructions too. So that's why we do what we do.
Wow. To play the role of the cynic for just a second, because we have lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds. Some people who are all in, some people who've been on trips, some people who have doubts, maybe even about our motives. Is this just guilt relief? Is this just a bunch of wealthy Americans sending money or going on a quick trip, coming back, kind of brushing off the dust and saying, I've been there and I did that, and feel better about themselves? The real question is, does this actually make a difference? Does this actually make a difference in these places that we visit and in these places where we send people and the places where we send all this money? Does it really make a difference?
It's a great question. And I think the real answer to that would come from the people in all these places where our partners work. And if you were able to ask them the question, their answer, I think, would answer that. So if you were able to ask, if we could put up this picture here. If you're able to ask the people of the 125 villages in the Agalta Valley in Honduras, if HOI, our partner there, and you have made a difference in their lives, they would tell you about the tremendous improvement in their health, in being able to have clean water in their villages, and that their children, these girls, would tell you about the education they're receiving that they wouldn't have received otherwise. And if you would ask the people in Dubai, Kenya, small village in northern Kenya where our partner 410 Bridge works, if you would ask them, it makes a difference, or if it makes a difference, they would say, this is the kind of water we used to drink. We used to have to get this dirty water from this river and carry it in these containers for 2 kilometers to our village. And now we've got clean drinking water in our village. We have farms that are thriving. We have families that are thriving. And did 410 Bridge and all of our churches make a difference? You bet it did. And if you ask a girl from Asia who was abandoned by her parents because she was a special needs child and they didn't have the resources to provide for her and would have died if our partner there had not cared for her and if your funding really hadn't helped them. And then if you were to see her today as a thriving girl, happy, healthy, and in a loving home, she'd say, you bet it made a difference in my entire life. And if you were to ask a boy from Uganda who was languishing in prison over a petty misdemeanor that he created when he was young, if you made a difference in his life, and then if you were to see him today, like these other boys, living a joyful life, integrated back into society, in many cases reintroduced to their own families and taught simply how to live outside of prison, they'd say, you bet it made a difference. And if you'd have asked the 5,000 people that have been on short-term trips in the last 6 years, did it make a difference as they see the progress in all these villages? You've got lots of people around here that can kind of tell you about that. And finally, when you see this girl, what you see is a smiling face of a beautiful little girl, right? What I see is a little girl that was born in Syria and has seen more evil and more atrocities in the world than any adult should ever be exposed to. And because of the work of our partner, Heart for Lebanon, and again, because of your generosity, this little girl is now smiling because she's going to a school and getting educated in Lebanon, she's still a refugee, but getting educated, and it's the joyous part of her life that she can go and learn about how to live life and what real life should be like. So did it make a difference? Our partners and your generosity have actually made a difference in 500,000 lives and are doing that on an ongoing basis. So it did. Thank you for all your generosity and those of you who have served.
And one of the things that I don't want to go by too quickly is we do have so many people who go back year after year or every other year after every other year to some of these same places. And the reason they go is because it captures their heart. But they come back and they tell the stories of the difference that had been made in 12 months or 24 months since they were there last. And those are some of the people who are most passionate about what we're doing because they actually see the progress. They know that it actually makes a difference. Hey, as we wrap up, and you just have to take my word for this, DURWOOD is really like an ambassador from all of us to these organizations and to countries all over the world. I can't even imagine how many frequent flyer miles you must have. I mean, I've traveled with him to China. I've traveled with him where I was coming home and he was going on somewhere else. I mean, it's remarkable. He serves on the boards of some of these organizations. I mean, he really has eyes and ears really for what's going on all over the world. And I think it's interesting because I asked you this question in private and I said, hey, I would love to ask you this in front of the congregation. From your perspective, and you have quite the perspective, what's the biggest challenge?
It's not what you think. The biggest challenge is apathy. And apathy is worse than disobedience because you're not even engaged. You're not in the game. And I think the normal reaction for most of us and most people around the world is you look at these problems, you think of 3 billion plus people living in poverty. You said, that's so big. What can I do about that? How can I ever make a difference in anything like that? So as a result, we kind of write it off and say, well, that's somebody else's problem. In fact, there was a song years and years ago called, I'd love to save the world. And the chorus went like this: I'd love to save the world, but I don't know what to do. So I'll leave it up to you. I'd love to save the world, but I don't know what to do, so I'll leave it up to you. And that's the normal reaction for all of us. Well, we know what you can do. If you go to globalx.org/trips, we've got 92 trips, 1,800 opportunities that you are needed for. The people around the world need to know that they have dignity, that they have people that care about them, that really love them. So we know what you can do, and we'd love for you to do that. Remember earlier I talked about how that in the early part of my career, I wanted more, and I was kind of looking for more and didn't know what it was? Well, here's what we've learned, is the more we're looking for is in the obedience of doing something uncomfortable. And we know it's uncomfortable for you to go on a Global X trip. We know it's uncomfortable for you to take a week's vacation and to raise money and to get on a long plane ride and to eat food you probably don't enjoy and to live in a place maybe that's not like you would normally live at home. We know all that's uncomfortable, but the more you're looking for is in the obedience of doing something uncomfortable. So, we'd like for you to take a trip and change a life. And the life you change may very well be your own.
Thank you, Durwood. Unbelievable. Isn't that great? Woo. You may not really be a church person at all, or you may have sort of a negative attitude toward Christianity, who knows? And if I were you, I would too, because your attitude toward Christianity or the church is based on your experience, and we're all a product to some extent of our experience. And I hope, if nothing else, what you just heard would maybe crack the door open just a little bit, that maybe the Christians you have met are not all the Christians that there are. And perhaps the church that you grew up in or the church you attended is not the only church that there is. And that there really is an enormous number of people all over the world who genuinely care just like you care. And perhaps regardless of your belief system, you would be open to partnering with us as we make a real difference in your world. The other thing before we go is I know not everybody likes a big church, but the great thing about a big church is we have big opportunities and we have the potential to make a big difference. And so not only are we over the next few weeks going to make a big difference in our local communities, I do hope you'll take to heart this invitation to consider how you could make a big difference globally. And even if you're not able to go on one of these trips, next year, many of you are going to get support letters from students in our student ministry, middle schoolers, high schoolers, families that are going to go on these trips. And as you support them, again, you support this work all over the world. Your generosity here, I guess one way of saying it, your generosity here will be felt there. In giving to Be Rich, you've resourced our global and local partners financially, and if you have the opportunity to go, you'd have an opportunity to actually resource them personally. So, thank you. And as a final thought, this is not an add-on. Again, going back to what Jesus said to his first century followers, he looked at them, and I think he looks at us, and he looks at all of us, and he looks at you, and he says, you are the light of the world. And so to all our Atlanta area churches and to all of our partner churches, thank you for being a light in your local community, and thank you for being a light in the world. And I hope you'll take a few minutes this afternoon, again, to go back and ask the question, what can I do locally as we've rolled out all these opportunities? And then for some of you, to answer the question, what can I do globally?